Blockchain New Zealand podcast is brought to you by Easy Crypto. 5 years ago, a passionate bunch of Kiwis created Easy Crypto in New Zealand to enable Kiwis and others to buy and sell cryptocurrency. The Easy Crypto website is simple and straightforward. They have heaps of great educational content that caters to both beginners and experts and are very transparent about fees. You can buy crypto with New Zealand dollars or with your credit card and get crypto sent directly to your wallet. Investing in cryptocurrency can of course be risky, so always do your own research. Visit easycrypto.com to start your crypto journey today. So KP, welcome to the show. Thank you for coming in today or up from where you've come from.
Yeah, Wellington, thanks for having me.
Just right before I clicked record, you said you're up to 10,500 members. How on earth does someone manage an organization like that? And who are these members? What are we talking about?
Yeah, so Institute of Directors members, leading organisations and community and businesses as well, right across New Zealand. So it's everything from NZX listed, Deloitte top 200 businesses, fully what we would call professional directors and what often people think about as a director, through to people serving on their school board of trustees, serving on not-for-profits, sports clubs, people running their own businesses, everything in between. So anyone who's interested in governance and as a director has the option to join the IOD. We're a voluntary organisation, so people join because they want to get better at the art and the science of governance and network with like-minded people and be challenged and stretched, which is great.
And so how many businesses do you know are in New Zealand? Do you know?
I'd have no idea, honestly. Okay. I have this conversation with the company's office all the time because people always say to me, well, how many directors are there in New Zealand? And the answer is actually there are hundreds of thousands because, a director also includes every butcher, every hairdresser who's running their own business, right? Yeah. So, and we know that the kind of figure that we use is, that 80% of New Zealand's population is made up of SMEs. But even the company's office have said, we really just don't know fully how many directors are out there and how many businesses. But lots.
And so presumably your proportion of members is also scaled according to, there's more small businesses than medium and more, or fewer large businesses than medium businesses.
Yeah, absolutely. And, we've got about 95% of the NZX 50 chairs who are members. There's a couple who aren't, and they know they're not. And there's this one point in time I just love to finish the set, just for one day because I'm a collector. And about 75% of the NZX independent directors are members. So really great representation from those larger listed corporates. But as I said, right through, and 51% of our members have told us that they have a not-for-profit role, and for many of them that will be their primary board role, like me, in terms of the boards I'm involved in, primarily not-for-profit.
And the distinction there is that if you're a board of an NZX listed company, one of your main responsibilities is to, produce value for the shareholders, whereas, the nonprofits are like your school boards, and various other things that are really looking out for the community. Yeah,
absolutely. And it's an interesting question, isn't it, about what does value mean? I think we've shifted a lot from perhaps 20 years ago where value meant profit and only profit, and value meant just for the shareholders. I think there's a much broader conversation happening, even in those larger corporate boards, about what does long-term value mean rather than just short-term share price.
Okay, so you've just come from, did you say the AGM?
Yes, the Auckland branch AGM held their meeting this morning.
And, in terms of, what you're seeing, like you just mentioned, how do you quantify this shift away from it's not all about profits, and how can you, to use a bad phrase, how can you sell that to people to convince them that actually, these, groups of stock exchange listed companies or these groups of corporates, which perhaps sometimes get bad press, how can you convince people or really make them aware that actually, no, it's not all about profits, maybe mostly, but not all?
Yeah, and profit's not a dirty word, right? Because profit allows us to invest in our people. It allows us to invest in our organisations, and makes the economy go round. And it means that we can use it to buy things that we want. whether that's at home or whether that's as a community in terms of tax. So, it's not a bad thing. But I think there's been quite a societal shift about our expectations as consumers on corporates. And as our community has expanded from just shareholders to much broader stakeholders, and as the kind of community expectations shifted, I think, that we do care about how our profits are achieved. We care about where those businesses are operating. We care about the externalities that they're putting back into our communities, issues like climate change, issues about transparency in our supply chain. It's called modern slavery, and I hate that term. I prefer modern anti-slavery.
Okay.
Those sorts of issues, we are concerned about the intergenerational impact of how we build really great long-serving organisations that contribute to being good citizens, that we could have that social license to operate, is the company a good neighbour, all of those sorts of issues, because we know that the organisations who are focused on those sorts of things actually will be developing much higher value and returning greater profit, because we as consumers will buy more of their products. We as employees will want to work for those organisations, so they'll attract great talent, so their costs will be lower. All of those sorts of things. Banks want to invest in them, capital wants to invest in them. And we're seeing that from, investors are really focused on low carbon businesses, for example. So that's been a really big shift. And I think there's a great kind of understanding kind of happening that, business isn't bad, but business can have, can actually have some positive impacts when done well.
Right. Business, I mean, definitely not bad. I used to think business was boring, and I steered away from it.
My kids would agree with you.
Studied
Yeah.
heavily technical subjects. I mean, I guess up to this day, but like I'm coming around to the fact that like business is essential, and like you say, profit should not be a dirty word. But there are some other words that do have certain stigmas, and you mentioned some pretty big issues here. So, like, how big is this climate issue in boards, in directorships today? Is it on everyone's plate all the time?
It's not on everyone's plate, and it should be, but it shouldn't necessarily be there all the time as the number one kind of issue. We identify a range of issues for directors to be focused on as the priorities each year, on top of everything else they've already got to do. And one of the number one issue we identified for this year was actually climate transformation.
Okay.
And it's been on our list for a number of years.
What does that mean?
So we're at the stage now where we know climate change is real. So we've kind of moved on from that aspect. We've kind of moved to now actually having to transform our businesses as a result of climate. So what's happening around particularly reporting structures? A number of our entities here in New Zealand will be world first. We'll have to have reporting around their carbon and climate reporting coming in. Even though that's kind of the top 200 finance and insurance companies, that'll spread to everybody else, and a number of other organisations are already doing that. Lots of global trends happening there. How are they investing in terms of the transformation to decarbonise? And so some of the choices and things that we're having to make. So the climate one's a really difficult one, because when we think about that short term, long term, on the one hand, it's easy to be making climate decisions because the boards have shifted to a longer intergenerational view. But on the other hand, it's incredibly hard because it is a short-term investment for that long-term return. And at the moment, it can be really hard to make the business case add up about, this generation of shareholders and this generation of the business having to make that big shift. And also a lot of the issues that we're asking boards to, sort of lean into, and some of the solutions that they're going to have to find, the technology is not currently known. So we're saying, please set these big kind of lofty climate goals for all of us, for the benefit of all of us and for the planet, but please don't greenwash. So, that's a really hard balance for them to sort of, how do I set a lofty goal that we're going to reduce our carbon emissions as an organisation if I'm an airline like Air New Zealand, when that technology at the moment does not exist, right? We all still want to fly around the world. We still need products flying around the world. So, Air New Zealand's doing a lot of work in that space. But at the moment, we still need fossil fuels to fly the majority of aeroplanes, right?
Air New Zealand
Yeah.
has this great ad, television commercial, what have you, and they say that they're going to be, I'm not sure what the wording is, but some sort of net zero carbon free in a short period of time, and they even like at the end have a mock-up of, I think, electrical propellers.
Yeah, and hydrogen planes and all
That
sorts
was
of
what
things,
it was.
right?
Yes. Hydrogen powered aircraft. And so, I mean, is that their version of saying, hey, look, we're doing this, but oh, by the way, we still have to use diesel to power our fleet.
Yeah, in the meantime, right? So yeah, absolutely. So there's a lot of innovation happening right across that particular industry because there's a global recognition that things like air travel and our transport emissions are one of the biggest things that's impacting on us getting to a low carbon economy. And that's not just air travel; that's all of us moving to electrifying fleets and other things, and more public transport and all of those different kind of issues, which can be really difficult in a long and skinny and hilly country like New Zealand, trying
Without railroads.
So it's a multi-headed kind of beast of the kind of challenges that we're asking boards to sort of lean into. But we're seeing some great sort of leaning into some of those technological challenges and innovation happening, and it's starting to move really fast. But climate's a really big challenge for boards to be thinking about how they're dealing with carbon and then also their impact on nature. What resources they're using, water, what impact are they having on biodiversity in those areas. So yeah, I don't think you could say business is boring anymore, that's for sure.
So part of the board's responsibility, and correct me where I'm wrong here, is that they have to like weed through these reports and sort of, I guess, assess the direction of the company, and this may involve really technical, complicated things like counting carbon footprints and impact of the business operations. Where are we on this? Are we sort of still in the weeds on this, or are people coming up to speed on how to do this?
It's a challenge for all of us, right? So one of the things that we've done with the Institute of Directors that we're hosting the Chapter Zero and we've partnered with the World Economic Forum to host the New Zealand chapter for Chapter Zero. It's the Climate Governance Initiative for Directors. We've made it freely available to everyone. You don't have to be a member of the IOD because we recognise it's such an important topic. And specifically that chapter is there to try and upskill directors and to help them make climate a priority in the boardroom, because we recognise there's just so much information coming at them. And, Chapter Zero provides that sort of governance lens, that New Zealand context, that curation, and that sort of guidance and training and, webcasts and summaries and all those sorts of things. One of the things that I've found most helpful is a lexicon, because all of a sudden there's this new language I had to learn. So all those sorts of tools and tricks to be able to help people. But the range of issues directors have to be over is really significant. So everything from, the accounting through to culture issues, health and safety, supply chains, the product of the business, the industry that they're in, through to issues like climate change and technology. It's a massive breadth of issues. So, people often say, I'd love to be on a board. I love working in a team. Okay. And I say, boards are great. They are a team environment for a day or two a month. The rest of the time you'll be at home doing a lot of reading on your own. So, if that doesn't fit for you, you don't like reading piles of information and, doing some thinking on your own, it's not going to be a good fit for you.
How you just got me thinking there. How do we get to this point where companies need a board of directors and these people come together once a month to check in, and then, as you say, spend their evenings, catching up or doing the reading? In terms of like company structure, do you have any?
Yeah, so we did some research with the Companies Office and biz.gov.nz, particularly with the SME sector, about what they sort of thought of governance. And it's really interesting because, at its core, great governance should be kind of, I call it like a little bit like a dragon's den, right? So you're going in and testing ideas, getting some coaching and mentoring and helping the business kind of, move forward. Whereas actually the research said to us that they see governance as kind of being controlling, about compliance, about looking backwards, and it shouldn't be. But from the research that we've done, it seems to be organisations start thinking about governance and setting up a board, or whether it's an advisory board, about the 10 to 15 mil turnover point.
Okay.
Because that's the kind of point where all of a sudden the bank's sort of saying to them, hey, you need to get away from it just being the two of you running it. You need a bit more external advice. And normally it starts with their chartered accountant joining the board, their lawyer, someone that they know in an advisory board kind of capacity. When it's got to that size and scale where they actually need to have a little bit more perspective on the business, kind of coming up, looking more out to the horizon, get out of the day-to-day, work on the business, not just in it. And it seems to be about that kind of point.
So about 10 million, that's in revenue?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And it varies, look, we see some organisations have got boards right from the very beginning, particularly in the tech space, because, they're trying to, if it's a startup and they're trying to move really fast, or they've got private equity involved, so there'll be, often there'll be a shareholder director sitting on the board, or that they're positioning themselves for exit at some point. So they want to set up those really good kind of, behaviours and things. So it varies across different things, but in a commercial kind of New Zealand SME context, about that 10, 15 mil.
And just one more note on this, is New Zealand doing well in this area in terms of companies being responsible, having good directorship, that sort of thing?
Yeah, I think generally they are. We see the occasional issue in the media with, directors, and it says directors behaving badly or directors haven't paid, IRD, those sorts of things. Primarily, most of those are sole directors in their own businesses, right? So it's really, are they directors and running a business as much that they've been creating a job for themselves and, running it as, their kind of operation. So we don't usually see boards getting themselves into too much trouble. So I think generally there's some really great directors that I get to see in my role as Deputy Chair and incoming Chair for the Global Network of Directors Institutes, the GNDI, which is all of the IODs around the world. I think New Zealand compares pretty well.
Okay, so that's like a third level up. You're already in kind of a meta position, director of a group of directors, and then there's a further step up as well in the global sense. Let's transition a little bit to tech. You recently had the Institute of Directors conference just last month, and my co-founder Bryan Ventura, you asked him to come along and present. And so he presented on, I don't know exactly what, on something to do with blockchain tech and maybe regulation, something like that. So I found that interesting that, as a blockchain focused tech presentation, even if it's from the regulatory side, he's in front of a group of directors that are trying to, provide better governance for their various foundations or companies. So where do you see this crossover, and perhaps maybe what type of tech trends are people talking about at this conference, or what advice are people asking for? If they're saying, hey, I've heard about blockchain, is that going to completely tank my business? Do I need to know? What are you seeing?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been in the role about 6 years now with the Institute of Directors, and one of my very first conferences, I'm really lucky I get to go up to our American Colleagues Conference in Washington, DC each October. And in 2018, I actually brought down one of the US speakers, Dr. Tamaika Tilleman, who was the chair of the Global Blockchain Business Council at the time, to come and speak to our conference for IOD members in 2018. So it's been an issue that we've been kind of trying to raise with directors and to kind of help them upskill and challenge them a little bit to think about things that are happening for quite a number of years now. But I'm a little disappointed, I'd say, and just in terms of how much engagement we're kind of getting from boards engaging on technology to the level that we'd kind of like. So
this is in general.
In general. So, for example, here in New Zealand, if I do the comparison with cybersecurity, that's an if, not like a when rather than if. Like we know we're going to get hit if we haven't already been hit, right? They're probably already
Very
in there.
Important, right?
So and that's if I look at my global comparisons against my colleagues in the US, Canada, Singapore, Australia, and the UK, South Africa. Cybersecurity is one of the top 3 issues, or the number 1 issue that's keeping directors awake at night. Here in New Zealand, it doesn't even make the top 3. Why?
No?
Why?
Okay.
Why do we think that, we're either got it covered or we're naive enough to think that we're not going to get sort of attacked? Correspondingly, we're really high on climate. So, one of our top spots is taken by climate, where my international colleagues haven't quite got climate to
All
that
right.
level yet. They're sort of, depending upon, US context, for example, they've got some challenges on that front. But we also do a director sentiment survey every year where we test directors on what's keeping them awake, what are the issues that are playing out for their businesses. And I brought some of the stats because we asked them what's the single biggest risk facing their organisation, and technological disruption was 12th on the list.
So 11 perhaps higher priorities or different priorities.
Yeah, only 8.2% of the people we surveyed said that tech disruption was the biggest issue facing them. And in terms of the future trends that they were paying attention to, AI was 7th on the list. So, to be fair, this was September last year. So AI was 7th on the list.
Right, slightly before the GPT
explosion. That's why I'm kind of like, I might give you a pass mark on that, but still, that was 14%. Metaverse was 9th on the list.
Wow, okay.
Crypto was 10th on the list at only 1.3%, and DAOs was 11th on the list at 1.3%. Right, so, but against the thing that really surprised me, 49% of them have said that they assessed the impact of technology, automation, and AI on their business. How can half of them say that they've assessed the impact of technology, automation, and AI, and then only, 14% of them say that they're paying attention to AI? Clearly haven't assessed it very well, right? We just did another AI pulse survey of the membership in the last couple of weeks. That's shifted significantly. ChatGPT.
Yeah.
Right? But I'd like to see more of the foresight work happening and not just the response. So a bit more proactive kind of tech engagement is really critical.
Were these responses prompted or were they volunteered?
We prompted them. We prompted them on the issues that we wanted to know the answers to. And that's why we put DAOs in there, for example.
Yep.
Very, very, very low response.
I'm impressed you put things like metaverse and a DAO and crypto into a potential list of this was risks, was it?
Yeah, issues. Yeah, absolutely.
Or issues, okay.
Future trends.
And in terms of tech disruption, like, is this because you think some of us are unaware, or is this because we're already in the tech business and therefore think that we have a handle on it? And so perhaps that's not in the risk category, but in the ongoing stuff that we deal with category.
We put it as a trend, not as a risk. So it was up to them as to how they would define it as positive or a negative. And even if it was on the risks, there's still opportunities from it too, right? Right across the community, we will have some who will be deeply engaged in this issue, right, and are leading some amazing work. But then we'll have others who go, I don't understand this topic at all, I've got so much to learn on it. And we did, in terms of the Pulse survey, really interesting results in terms of the numbers who are, using particularly ChatGPT or using AI. And we asked them for a gut feel. Positively or negatively, what's your view about whether AI is going to be positive? And almost 80% said that they felt that it was going to be positive. So that's hopeful.
That is very hopeful. I like that. Yes.
So that's that it's a good thing. But we actually had some who also said that they thought it was going to be negative as well. So that was quite an interesting kind of piece as well. So when I asked them, is it positive or negative, 10% have said negative. So there's the group that don't know, and that's okay too, because at least they're thinking about it.
Yeah.
But 10% of the Pulse, it was a really small survey, it was only about 275, but 10% have said, actually, I think AI is going to be negative.
Okay, well, that's not too small to have results on. I'm actually, you're right. That is hopeful in my point of view. I'm an optimist, and I think that we are a long way off from existential type of risks. Or even the pared back version from AI, but on the other hand, in terms of jobs and productivity, I absolutely think that we need to be watching this closely. you have to be aware of this stuff. I think that it's only a matter of time. We're not going to be able to put that chat back in the box, are we?
Yeah, no, that's right. And if we think back, BC before COVID, if we can remember that far back, the big conversation we were having was around the future of work. And it was all about robots taking the jobs. Right? We were all concerned that robots were taking over. And I think what it showed with the borders being closed is that actually we need more robots. We haven't got enough people. The number one issue that has come through in our surveys is it's not cyber. Actually, it's about not being able to get access to people.
Okay.
So it's about talent and immigration and all of those kind of aspects. So we should be leaning into the robots, right? And because we desperately need them. It's going to be a great thing for productivity if we can retrain people and make sure that, that there's kind of fair distribution about how all of that works. But I think the big kind of piece we've missed as a disconnect for a number of the people that I'm talking to is that when we were talking about the future of robots, they were kind of thinking their vision of kind of, humanistic type robots that were sort of going to be a little bit like, a sci-fi movie,
Yep.
not thinking about the fact that actually the robots that are going to take the jobs were going to be the chatbots. And that kind of aspects, the digital robots. And so I think that's the big shift that perhaps in the last couple of years people are having to kind of be confronted by. I'm a lawyer by training and by background, and there's all this conversation and chat going around, that the lawyers are going to be made redundant.
I think that's a prime use case of a large language model, actually, is all this legal documentation that takes a human years to read and be able to pick out and search through. So that you can understand, things like precedent and even legal documents have blown up in size, haven't they?
Yeah, that's right.
So I mean, I don't know where lawyers will stand at the end of the day, but for sure, if I was a lawyer, I would be hiring someone to come in and like build my LLM, and so that we know the limitations, what it can do, and perhaps where it's going in the future. I think that this is a great breakout for this low level or medium level AI, but I don't know where it's going to take us. But I feel like we're kind of we've done our step up, and now we might be cruising for a while, optimizing the way that these present chatbots are working, while other people go out and optimize, for example, for legal or for medical advice and these things, and hopefully we'll have time to go away and run those experiments. And come back and say, well, actually, your doctor, with the help of their AI, can see twice as many patients and is actually 4 times more accurate.
Yeah, that's right. And we've seen some of that already, haven't we, with some of the pathology scanning and, X-rays and scans and other things. There's a much higher, kind of hit rate of picking up, cancerous cells and all sorts of things. So there's some great opportunities for all of those things. And, before I was at the Institute of Directors, I was the Chief Exec for the Institute of Chartered Accountants. And the conversation there was about the impact of Xero on accounting jobs, when actually, the work still needs to be done, and Xero's, really helped in all of those kind of platforms, but becoming trusted business advisors, right? So that'll be the shift for the legal profession too, is that actually, yes, you can take care of some of the paperwork and those other aspects, but there'll still be a role for trusted business advisors, and, so that'll hopefully allow us to spend some more human-to-human time.
I mean, that's a really good point. I still want a human at the front of the plane, at least pretending like like they know what to do.
Yeah.
With regards to AI, we've got upcoming elections. We're in an election cycle. We have an upcoming election in October. And, we've already seen the National Party come out and use AI to produce some, to replace stock photos, as they said, to produce some ad material. And people jumped all over and said, "Hey, what's going on here?" Including when you zoom in on the photos, picking out some of the hilarious aspects of not using real people in your ad material. What do you think about things like this displacing a bunch of not necessarily whole sectors, but a bunch of other business?
Yeah, I think there's some interesting challenges, particularly around copyright, isn't there? So, so one of the things that we've set just as our own policy at the Institute of Directors, that we've encouraged the staff to use it for anything that's going to be public facing, like, whether it's website content or other things, and have a play and to do some stuff. But particularly not to be drawing on anything we're putting our IP in, or where it's going to be creating something where it has the potential that it has picked up IP from someone else, and some of those other kind of challenges, and also not putting any member data into it, or anything from any staff data, staff records, those sorts of things. Just in terms of the current format and how it's kind of fitting together. But there's going to be some regulation requirements still as we kind of get to sort of landing on some of the issues. And when we asked people, there was on this pulse survey, overwhelming support that actually New Zealand needs some form of AI regulation. So we're starting to see some shifts on that internationally. I hope that New Zealand doesn't kind of get left behind, because our regulatory frameworks usually are too slow to kind of keep up. But we're relying on things like the Privacy Act and other aspects already at the moment. But there'll be new industries that get created out of it, right? Ones that I couldn't even describe at this point.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's the exciting thing, is that we don't know how to describe it.
Yeah.
But copying and pasting data into a web interface, especially if it's like, say you've got a spreadsheet, company data, personnel data, or something like that, right? I mean, that's a sticky wicket. OpenAI runs ChatGPT. Microsoft is a giant investor, and they're loading up all the Office products,
that's right.
with Clippy 2.0.
Yeah.
And like, essentially, we have no idea really what's going on in the back end there. Whereas I guess before, we kind of thought, oh yeah, our spreadsheets are stored, in this cloud location, which there's regulation about these sorts of things, and or others shouldn't have access to them. But when you start like putting everything in a pot, in a large language model pot, so that you can make it better, I mean, I'm glad that I'm not having to write that regulation.
Yeah, and it's interesting from an assurance perspective, right? And audit, that's one of the big kind of challenges that, boards and management teams are starting to try and get their heads around. How do we know what it's being asked to do and what it's giving us the answer back? How is it calculating that? Is there bias in the system, for example? And how do you kind of get assurance over a black box when, there's proprietary data in there, and it's almost impossible to sort of get an understanding about how it's all sort of giving you the answer that it's given you. So there's going to be some interesting kind of challenges going through about who's responsible for the answer that it gives you, and who's responsible for the use of that answer. And no doubt we'll be looking to our American colleagues who like to litigate a lot of these issues to help sort of provide some guidance, I guess.
Let's talk about DAOs a little bit. DAOs are kind of born out of the blockchain era, and so there's definitely some crossover here. The blockchain idea is that you can have a decentralized store of data, and no one can censor that data, and perhaps you have some value transfer along the way, whether it be through some tokens or through some Bitcoin, something like that. And again, you can't turn off the servers, because everyone's running a piece of it themselves, and so I haven't looked into too much about DAOs, but that's why I'm going to ask you a little bit about them right now. The idea of a DAO is that you can take an organizational structure, or you can take maybe some governance, and you can distribute that throughout the community members, again, so that you don't have like a CEO, or maybe you don't have a director, or you might not even have like a legal foundation anywhere. We've definitely seen a lot in blockchain land, a lot of DAOs claiming to distribute, tokens and various things. And personally, I don't think I've seen a lot of success in the space, but that doesn't mean that we can't have success in the future running a decentralized autonomous organization. Where do you stand on this? Have you seen examples of success or not in this space?
I'm not sure we've got great examples of success yet, and I'm not sure that that I stand anywhere on it. I'm watching, right? I'm interested to see these kind of trends, because in terms of bringing shareholder voice, if we would sort of say, then a DAO actually might be a really effective way of bringing shareholder voice, because people great transparency. Everybody gets to have an opportunity to have a say. I think there's been a lot of poorly executed examples very early on, some of which obviously got cyber attacked again. But there's some examples in terms of how you kind of set it up, what provisions you've got, rules you've got in place, and how you change some of those rules. So I think there's some interesting challenges about the conditions under which it's operating. But here in New Zealand at the moment, we couldn't have a fully operating DAO because under our company's law at the moment, directors have to be a natural person.
Yep.
So we saw an example in Hong Kong, sort of 2016, where Vital, it was called, with a company in Hong Kong who appointed an AI to their board and formed part of their decision making, and they've kind of tried to sort of go also down distributed decision making a little bit more with DAOs as well. So I think we'll probably get to some variation of that. Our Australia is already looking at some regulation in the space in terms of DAOs, and the US as well. Here in New Zealand, not on the priority list, given election year as well. That's always a problematic time of year. But I think we're going to have to start kind of getting some more regulation and guidance as to how this can operate. It's some huge benefits if we can get some of those elements of transparency, but I still think it's going to be quite a significant cultural shift for us as humans to not have someone responsible. And that's going to be the big shift. So I can see models where it could work for parts of how we operate within our corporate structures.
Yep.
Whether how many generations it will take us to get to a fully autonomous organisation without having, someone responsible, I'd say that's quite a big cultural shift. Because if we look at what I'm seeing around, a greater awareness of people being held to account, that's part of our culture at the moment. Who is responsible? I think there'll be some questions asked between, if this fully autonomous company over here, who's holding it to account? Who's the responsible adults? If something goes wrong, who's responsible for all of that? I'm not quite sure that as a humanity, we've kind of thought that through yet.
We'll get there. In terms of having a shareholder voice, can you expand on that? And are you suggesting that shareholders don't always have their voice that they should have?
Well, there's, depending upon the size of the organisation and how distributed the shares are, right? Because if we think about why boards were created right back in the very eons of time, it was to be a voice for the shareholders, because there was too many people to be able to all get together and run the organisation. So if you've got 1,000 shareholders or 10,000 shareholders, trying to get that many people together to make decisions, very difficult.
Sure.
And so that's what a board of directors is there to do. To be, originally it was there as the representatives of that group to act in the best interests of the company. We trust you. We're anointing you as our representative. We trust you to work in the best interests of the company as our guides. Blockchain technology, DAOs, etc., really gives some opportunities for really distributed shareholdings to be able to have a voice and a say other than just at the AGM.
Right.
So it's quite a different kind of model, and we're starting to shift to more real-time decision making in terms of how boards and how management teams are responding to real-time operational retail shifts, trends, and financial information. So real-time decision making and feedback and consultation from shareholders are going to become much more of a thing too.
I also like the idea in there of adding in this transparency and auditable nature, even of like the micro fine decisions that maybe aren't on the trend list or the hit list, but that you can then go back and do things like assess performance and be able to make evaluations. And so hopefully we can strike a balance there. But I would tend to agree with you that transitioning from having humans in control to introducing the idea of, even if you just have like one board member, your AI member might be incredibly disruptive.
Yes.
And then like, are you allowed to kick them out? Did you think about that rule before you brought them in and things like this? So very interesting times ahead, or perhaps disruptive times ahead. The other question, which is one of my favorites to ask, is like, who are we holding responsible? For generally broad things that I see every day in the media. When things go pear-shaped and we sort of come up, we say, like, can we hold anyone, or did we hold anyone responsible? A sort of a not life and death, but a very real example is in tech. There's been a whole lot of job cuts lately, and I mean not just in tech, right? We're at university right now, and the universities in New Zealand, pretty much all of them are lining up this year, to decide what to do about their books, and a number of them have already put numbers out there saying that these are the cuts that we're going to have to make. If you look at something like industry changes, or we go through COVID and we run out of money and then we have to cut employees, do you see that responsibility lying in part with the board?
Yeah, absolutely. The board has huge responsibilities, and I often sort of joke that if I have a bad day at work as a manager, I get fired. Not ideal, but recoverable, right? I can move on to another job. But if you have a bad day as a director, you can not only lose your house, but you can go to jail. Right? There's not many jobs where you can go to jail for doing your job, and so personal liability is a big issue for directors. So they're probably one of the most personally liable members of the business community. So most of us are protected by our employer if we're doing our job at work, or protected by the company being held to account. But in their job, they are personally liable, and so they're responsible. From everything which we would fully support, health and safety, personally liable for that, right through to a broad range of issues in reporting, culture and conduct, all sorts of things that they now have to be responsible for. And so, I think that's one of the big shifts, particularly if we're going to have this kind of shift in the technology space. At the moment, directors are personally liable. They are the ones we hold to account. It is an incredibly responsible position, which is why they have to exercise due care and due diligence in the delivery of that. I'm not quite sure as a community we're quite ready to let that go and pass that on to the bots.
Is that stressful?
It can be incredibly stressful, but I think the great governance is transformational, though, right? It really have the opportunity to work on some amazing businesses, and to whether like for me in the not-for-profit space, work on some amazing community initiatives. So it does have a great impact on creating stronger communities and a really great and thriving New Zealand. So I think they're challenged by that. But often the perception is, or the old days was, that directors were these part-time, overpaid, kind of playing golf just here for the lunches.
That was my perception too.
And it's just not the reality, right? You just you wouldn't. Most of them, they're earning less money than they did in their management jobs. They're not doing it for the money. The risk does not match up with the reward. In the New Zealand context, sure, it's a lot of money by New Zealand standards for some of those larger listed boards, but again, the risk exposure and is still pretty high as well. So,
well, and those would be very competitive positions, would they not?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely, very competitive positions, and we need great people to serve on, on our government boards, and some of the the people who are leading the health reforms, those sorts of issues. We need great people who are there to serve and to deal with some of the really great, difficult, tricky issues that our communities are facing, and build really thriving businesses who can kind of respond to those issues too.
In crypto land, we had an epic meltdown last year. Well, we had a few last year. It was a bad year, but in September, October, FTX US, the exchange, they turned out to be not just insolvent. They turned out to be sort of incredibly negligent in a lot of their business practices.
It looked like fun though, parts of it, didn't it? I thought, boy, there's we really need to look at where the IOD offices are. We could move to
for
the
sure.
Bahamas, wasn't it?
It was in the Bahamas,
Yeah,
yeah.
nice.
And their leader SBF, he had a penthouse rented, and everyone sort of like had this ongoing sleepover where they would work and play, and I don't know. It was perhaps a lot of fun, but now we're dealing with the consequences.
Yeah.
So I've got a quote here. Noam Wasserman, writing in the Harvard Business Review. So he's comparing Facebook and FTX. Mark Zuckerberg is quite famous for retaining control of Facebook, now Meta. And he says at least Facebook had a board of directors and audited financials. FTX resisted creating an official board of directors until January. This is just 9 months before their collapse. And the VCs who invested in FTX did not get board seats. Its financials were an epic mess. Top executives included several of the founders' college friends. They're just like, how did we, with all these red flags, on the field, how did we get to the point where people were throwing money at this guy, asking to invest in his business?
It's exactly why good governance is needed, right? At the time that Sheryl Sandberg was appointed Chief Operating Officer at then Facebook, there was a quote, I think, that she was being appointed as parental supervision, right, as an adult, or
I bet she loved that.
sort of, as an adult in the room, because at that particular time of their journey, they were, sort of emergent governance, right, as that kind of piece, and recognizing that as organizations grow, you do need to have some parental supervision. There does need to be some checks and balances. There needs to be some people who are working on the business, not just in it. There need some people who can provide some objectivity, some people who can hold management to account, right? So all of those things that are incredibly important, some good systems and structures, and why do people throw money at these sorts of issues? I'm not sure if you're familiar with the Theranos example that's played out in the US as well.
That's Elizabeth Holmes.
Elizabeth Holmes, it's just starting, I think it's an 11-year prison sentence for that. I've been following that story as a governance story. They had a board, but it was in the American term called a vanity board. Selected for their names, not necessarily for their skill set, and there was not enough of holding the CEO to account.
So these were like more celebrity figures. Yeah. That you could then go shop to other investors and say, hey, look who's on our board.
Absolutely. One of the key differences between governance models here and in the US is that, here it's quite uncommon for us to have the CEO and the chair being held by the same office, right? So we usually have a separation, an independent chair, and separate from the CEO. In the US model, it's quite common, although it's starting to decline, and I think these sorts of examples really are starting to push that, where it's quite common to have the president, the chair of their board, also be the CEO. Right. So on one hand, people will say, well, that means that the CEO is directly aligned with what the board objectives are, and there's, a shared kind of understanding. But the risk of that is that there's not enough kind of supervision in there and not enough separation between governance and management, not enough holding to account. And I think that particular example that's played out in the industry in the last sort of 6 to 9 months really would have benefited from some great governance, a little bit more independence, more system structures, more sort of adult supervision. And actually, the business would have been much better off, not only protection for shareholders, but actually the business probably would have done a better job, survived, thrived, and built more long-term value. So I think it's a pretty sad example all around, really.
In terms of Theranos, if you're filling up your board with perhaps people that have varied experience, but they're a medical company, right? They're doing blood testing. Would you say get like a medical scientist on your board, or get like a research doctor on your boards,
Absolutely. And that's the great thing about boards, right? Boards by definition are there because of diversity. So there's all this conversation about diversity on boards, and we can have that conversation. But by their nature, boards were created by recognition that no one individual, no one CEO can have all of the answers to all of the issues. And by putting a board in place, whether that's, 6 or 8 people who can bring all of those different kind of pie pieces from like Trivial Pursuits, I'm the expert on this and you're the expert on that. And between us, we make up the entire pie. And so you do want to, have some industry knowledge of what your particular industry is. If you're in the ag sector, then get someone who's got ag experience. If you're in the building sector, get someone with building experience. You should have a chartered accountant on your board just because of the nature of the financials. We're all responsible for finance, but get a specialist as well. If you're in a tech sector, make sure you've got some technology skills. And so your boards should be reflective of the strategy of the organisation. And the other thing with boards is that they're not permanent appointments usually, right? So they're on a term, somewhere between usually 3 years. It'll be a 6 or 9 year term, sometimes a bit longer, depending upon the nature. But that's a recognition as well that the strategy and the needs of the organisation change over that time. And so we should be refreshing, bringing in whatever those strategic skills that we need are, and bringing that diversity of thought and skill set. But having industry experience on your board you need to understand how your organisation makes money, how regulation works in your particular area, understand your stakeholders. That comes from industry experience.
Just coming to the end of our time here, is it true, or can you tell us, did you have to get New Zealand Rugby to specially tailor you branded material because they'd never had a female working for them before?
So I was lucky enough to work at New Zealand Rugby for almost 10 years. And so there was one woman who was before me, that was Dame Therese Walsh. She recruited me into the business, and when she left, I moved into her role. So there was 2 of us at that time working in the executive team, but I was the first to actually have maternity leave while I was working at the New Zealand Rugby Union. One of the great things about New Zealand Rugby is you get what's called, they have dress calls, so that in a team environment, you know what you're wearing that day. And so everything's numbered, number 1s, number 2s, number 3s, what you got to wear. Number 1s is your dress suit that you wear for kind of formal team events, photos, board meetings. And so, of course, when I became pregnant, my number 1s no longer fitted me.
Oh, right.
So for the first time ever, they hadn't normally had a female outfitting before. So they had a male suit provider, but they didn't have a female suit provider because that wasn't something that they'd had to do before. So they had to specially get in the material from the male suit provider to make sure that I could have a suit made. It was an interesting time. Things have changed a lot since then.
It's a fun anecdote. Where are we today?
Exactly right. So I started, it's 20 years since I started working at New Zealand Rugby, so it's been a while since I've left. So it's been 10 years ago since I left. They've moved a long way in that time, and I think it's an interesting snapshot about how far New Zealand's progressed, which is great.
I think that's a great place to finish. Are you up for a few rapid fire questions before we go?
Absolutely.
All right. Where's your favorite place in New Zealand?
My favourite place in New Zealand is Foxton Beach. We've got a place there where we try and get away for holidays, and it's like old time New Zealand, no footpaths, just relaxed, and there's only an hour and a half away from my home, and I love it.
Whereabouts is Foxton Beach?
Foxton Beach is just north of Wellington.
Okay. What is the best nonprofit you have been a part of, perhaps in a board role or otherwise?
I'd have to say the Wellington Homeless Women's Trust. They do such amazing work and with such a marginalised section of society, and I learned so much, and it's a real honour to continue to be an ambassador for them because, it's a area of the community that lots of us kind of just want to walk past and not make eye contact.
What is the biggest problem facing boards right now, 2023, June?
Volume overload, I think. Just the sheer complexity of issues coming at them and intersected risk. So I think we've kind of moved on from sort of individualized risk where we can put it in nice little boxes and kind of put it in a matrix and say that we've dealt with that. It's the intersectionality of all of those risks, and it's one big kind of messy ball of string. Because you can't talk about climate without talking about technology, and you can't talk about that without talking about culture. So how they unravel that ball of string and which little bit to pull first to untie the knot, that's the biggest risk they've got. Yeah.
You have your own podcast. It is a 7-part series. I've listened to most of it. And it won a silver award at the New York Radio Awards. Congratulations on that. It's called Across the Board.
Yes.
What was the best and most tricky part about doing that podcast?
We were incredibly lucky. Sonia Yee, who works in our team, used to be a podcast representative for Radio New Zealand, so she's got amazing skills. So great to have her come into the team. What we were trying to do was try and make governance accessible. So that was probably the most difficult part of it. Was we were trying to reach a broad audience about what governance is and sort of dispel some of those myths, because it impacts all of us every day. Every service we use, every product we pick up has usually had some element of governance over the top of it, and we just don't realise that it's just sort of a kind of invisible part of our day-to-day lives. And when it's done well, it can have a huge impact, but when it's done badly, it can also have an impact. So trying to bring that to life was our challenge.
All right, KP, thank you very much for coming in today.
Wonderful, thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us, folks. Look out for the next episode of the BlockchainNZ podcast, probably in the same spot you found this one. Cheers.